The work of one of the most prolific artists and legendary creators, John Byrne, was featured in the Advanced Comic Creation course. This is pulled from a live presentation. The destination is what matters, not the journey. And the reason that matters so much, because that's the context he said it in. It was a question of, does it matter whether you draw, whether you paint, whether you do 3D assets? Do you do CGI? Should I do watercolor? Can I do a sprite-based comic? Should it be manga? Should it be Western? And I asked him, and again, he's if you don't know, John Byrne, legendary Marvel and DC artist, long storied career. We should all pretty much know who he is. Born in England, I believe, and moved to Canada. He created the team Alpha Flight. He was known for being the big artist on X-Men for a while, him and Chris Claremont. She-Hulk, he reinvented the Fantastic Four by adding on the She-Hulk and replacing the Thing. His drawing style over the years has been talked about and lauded because he does things that others don't really do, and a lot of that has to do with his backgrounds. That's part of his style, is to just always fill in the backgrounds. And you've sometimes heard people say that about us in our comics, where they say, oh, you guys don't really cut out the backgrounds often. You don't really isolate your characters that often, and they say that's something that's a little bit different from how we approach our work, because our backgrounds usually come with the environment. But in this case, you have to make a stylistic choice to remove them, where in his case, he had to make a stylistic choice to include the backgrounds. What he's been working on recently is an unofficial X-Men comic book called Elsewhen. And I also have links to where you can read it. It's hosted on his private forum, but there are sites that have the hosted free version of some of the sections. So it's an unlicensed story from Marvel that he's never even given the opportunity to publish, because he wants to control it completely by himself. So he's basically going to do the drawing, the penciling, and leave it there, where there's no ink or there's no coloring. It's just him, and he's writing it as he goes along. This is a splash page with familiar characters that we know. The breakup, the paneling, the choice to use the completely black lines. You see the panel division right here, right? The flow of the panels, characters breaking the panel. This is when we talk about rendering and not including the background. Heavy stuff here. Look at the slanted page. We talked about this. Who did this? B? Was this B that did this? Tilted the panel. Very deliberate stylistic choice. Look at what this does to the action. And you follow the balloons upward in the S. S here, and then he forces you to ramp backwards up. Forces your eyes to ramp backwards up. And again, this is supposed to be the work of someone who's retired. Sheesh. The amount of detail he's putting in these shots is a labor of love. Not concerned with time, deadlines, people leaning over his shoulder saying, get it done. He's able to have as much fun as he wants. Look at the broken up panel. And again, this is the rawest form because we're looking at his pencils. There's no ink, there's no coloring, there's nothing else. Just, he has to do it all just with this and some shading. And yet you're getting the feel of it. Look at the panel break. You see these little rules being bent? Much like LaRoche when he was doing his stack panels, how he's breaking out to the edges. And in this case, this frame around is becoming part of his art. The frame around it, which most of us have been ignoring, he's using it as part of his art to break into it. And this is what we talked about earlier about page level thinking. You're not thinking panel to panel, you're thinking about pages. You can see his little pencil lines. You know, as funny as it is, you can see that, like the little curved line, you could tell, like that's the, I forgot what they're called. Not a protractor, but they have the little, the S-curve brush. The S-curve is what makes a lot of this stuff. But you can see the freehand control he has over the pencils. Yeah, the French curve, exactly. Well said. Look at the breakup here. top of the page. So this basically turns this page into this being the real page, and he just puts this on top. And again, he's not so much showing off, but it's like every page he's doing something. Every page he's pushing it. Every page. The slight tilt in all the panels. And again, he's very adamant about this. And I'm semi-surprised he gave us permission to show all his work in our class. I pretty much figured he would have said no, but apparently, he's about, giving back and letting us look at his stuff. Shadow work here, you could tell this will be fully filled in black, is what this note means here. In the shadows, pun intended. Let's cut a little bit ahead. Look at this. Reminds me of some of my favorite Conan illustrations. Look at this. Look at the energy. And it's just done with just pencils. Not like there's no stark black in this. There's very little, like you can see the grayness of it. And as we talked about before, the same thing with Ed's work and many of our work, we break up the panels during action moments. You don't need the panels. Let your eyes jump around. Let the panels lay out as chaotic as the action. I'm here, then I'm here, then I'm here. And she's like leaning into the panel. And again, when we're studying other people's work, we're basically just looking for inspiration. These are ideas that we may not have thought of before on our own and said, wow, look at the break up the panel. I could do this. I could do something like this. Look at the tone and the feel of it. Where we're not reading anymore. We're studying. Studying, right? We did some of this ourselves. We have the character close-ups. And if you also study it, you're looking at now a little bit of a study in camera placement. We discussed this in the previous weeks with where they put the camera, right? Slightly above. This is the below shot. You're seeing the bottom of the character's feet. Think about that. That's where the camera is. Where's this camera? Under the floor. I'm laying on this is the worm's eye view. This is a lot of work here. One of the rules is broken. He breaks one of the rules of never use a completely circular word balloon. He's broken that rule here. And it hasn't really slowed you down. Probably this is what keeps this from sticking out too much. If this was isolated by itself, it probably would look like he was really breaking the rule. But it's not that noticeable. There's just so much activity in all the panels. Look at the perspective work. Camera angle. This is like, what I call this? Just like that ceiling view. Then the character, and look at the, of course this is because it's pencil work. The character just breaks out of it just a little bit on the edges. Look at this panel. These are all ideas for us to consider. All ideas for us to consider when it comes to page layout. All ideas for us to absorb. Why break this panel here? Don't you want to ask him, like, why not just cut? Why did you not choose to cut this? What did you feel right here that you wanted this to drag off into the bottom? What's going on? What's going on in his head as he's putting this together? Look at the perspective, this camera up in the ceiling. Look how above the character, how diminutive they feel because of the perspective. The menace that goes on with this. Even the punch. This is what we talked about with the camera rotation. This is the punch in the face, but this character, look, he's not laying down punching him. It's where he's chosen to place the camera in the panel. He took this panel, which was vertical, and laid it on its side for this shot. Because again, he's not laying on the floor throwing the punch. But you understand completely what's happening. If we're going to talk about breaking the 180 rule, yeah, this probably breaks the 180 rule, but it's seamless, so you're not stuck. You're not like, did he dive on the floor? No, you understand that it's the change and shift. But I think we're understanding how this works, right? We're seeing the different artists. We're seeing their different approach to panels, to pages, to layout, how their word balloons sit. Yeah, this is where he went over the top. This is where I started studying this from to pull it for the class today was all of these images. Very nice work. Less is more as he's telling the story. So I think we have, let me just cut to that one. There's like one more panel I wanted to show. Oh my goodness, the complexity of this shot. And again, the cut is this. What is this? Is this the roof? Is this a cutaway view? What is this? But you just know that they're inside the cramped confines of their ship. I remember him explaining the story that she falls out, you know, with her problem with her powers, and she falls out. Yeah, and they end up starting to have their jungle adventure. Look at this. But again, we're back to looking at how defined the backgrounds are. So that's pushing it. That's pushing it. Very heavy pushing it. So I think that's one of the things that we have to remember.